The conference room exploded with applause as my ex-boyfriend stepped away from the microphone, his smile wide and confident. I sat frozen in the second row, a guest badge clipped awkwardly to my navy blazer. Around me, investors leaned forward in their leather chairs, scribbling notes on tablets and whispering excitedly to each other. Camera flashes popped from the back of the room. This was supposed to be our moment, the culmination of 4 years of late nights, impossible deadlines, and dreams we'd built together from absolutely nothing. But as I watched him bask in the attention, soaking up praise for every innovation, every strategy, every breakthrough, my chest tightened with a feeling I couldn't quite name yet. Then he said the words that changed everything. "I founded this company right after a difficult breakup," he announced, his voice clear and practiced. "Sometimes the hardest moments push us to create something meaningful." The room murmured with sympathy. My hands went numb. I realized then, sitting perfectly still while people applauded around me, that I had just been erased. Completely, publicly, deliberately. And he didn't even look at me once. I forced my face into something neutral, something that wouldn't draw attention or questions. My fingers tightened around the cheap paper coffee cup until the sides buckled slightly. The liquid inside had gone cold an hour ago, but I held it anyway, needing something to anchor me to reality. Around me, nobody noticed my reaction. Why would they? To everyone in this room, I was just another attendee, another face in the crowd of potential investors and industry observers. The journalists in the back row typed furiously on their laptops, capturing his version of history. Venture capitalists nodded approvingly, already calculating returns on investment. I stayed silent because I knew the rules of this world. Speaking up now would make me look emotional, bitter, unstable. And this room wasn't built to hear women like me, unless we remained perfectly calm and collected. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Because while he stood there rewriting history, he was also making critical mistakes. Small ones, the kind that people like him never notice until it's too late. And silence was already costing him more than he could possibly understand. My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 34 years old, and until about 6 months ago, I was the operations lead and co-founder of a logistics software startup called Streamline Core. We built it from nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean it. We started in a cramped apartment with a folding table from a discount store, drinking cheap coffee and surviving on optimism and ramen noodles. The idea was simple but powerful. Create software that helped small delivery companies compete with giants like Amazon. Real-time route optimization, predictive scheduling, automated dispatch. Technology that could level the playing field for businesses that couldn't afford enterprise solutions. I wrote the first market analysis at 2 a.m. on my old laptop while he was still working his day job. I conducted the initial client interviews that proved the concept was viable. For 4 years, I poured everything into this company. My time, my expertise, my connections, my belief. And now I was watching him claim it all as his own creation. This wasn't the first time he'd taken something that wasn't his to take, but it would definitely be the last. We met 5 years ago at a tech networking event I almost didn't attend. His name was Cameron Walsh, and back then, he was still working as a mid-level project manager at a consulting firm, feeling stuck and frustrated. I was transitioning out of operations management at a regional shipping company, looking for my next challenge. We started talking about the inefficiencies we both saw in the logistics industry. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Within a month, we were dating. Within 6 months, we were building something together. Those early days felt magical. We believed in each other before anyone else did. When banks rejected our loan applications, we bootstrapped. When investors dismissed our pitch, we refined it. When clients hesitated, we offered free trials and worked around the clock to prove our value. I handled operations, client relations, and product development, while he focused on marketing and fundraising. We were partners in every sense of the word. That's what made this betrayal cut so deep. I didn't just lose a job or a business opportunity. I lost my place in the story we'd written together. And he rewrote me out of it like I'd never existed at all. The breakup happened 8 months ago. We'd been growing apart for a while. The relationship strained by stress and exhaustion. The company was finally gaining traction, which somehow made everything between us worse instead of better. One night, after another argument about priorities and communication, we both admitted what we'd been avoiding. The romance was over. "But this doesn't change the business," he said that night, sitting across from me at our kitchen table. "You're essential to everything we've built, Nat. We can separate the personal from the professional." I wanted to believe him. I really did. So we agreed to keep working together. 2 weeks later, my system access was temporarily limited pending restructuring. My name quietly disappeared from internal documentation. When I asked about it, he said there were technical issues. When I pushed harder, he said we were streamlining operations. Within a month, my title had changed. Within 2 months, I was being phased out of major decisions. Within 3 months, I realized temporary meant forever. And I had trusted him enough not to protect myself legally when I should have. I discovered the investor demo day the way most people learn about parties they weren't invited to, social media. A LinkedIn post from our company account appeared in my feed one Tuesday morning. "Excited to present at the Capital Ventures Demo Day this Friday. Join us as we showcase the future of logistics technology." My stomach dropped. This was huge. The kind of exposure that could unlock millions in funding. The kind of opportunity we'd been working toward for years. And nobody had told me about it. I immediately called him. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice distracted. "Yeah, what's up?" "The demo day," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "When were you planning to mention it?" There was a pause. I could hear keyboard clicking in the background. "You'll be there," he said finally. "You just won't be presenting? We thought it would be cleaner to have one voice for the pitch." Cleaner. As if my involvement was messy. As if my contributions were complications to be tidied away. I should have walked away right then. I should have called a lawyer, demanded equity documentation, protected my interests. I didn't. I stayed to see how far he would go. Friday arrived too quickly. I drove to the venue in downtown, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The event was being held at an upscale conference center, with floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art hanging on white walls. Everything about it screamed success and sophistication. I walked up to the registration desk, where a cheerful young woman with a tablet greeted me. "Name, please?" "Natalie Brooks," I said. "I'm with Streamline Core." She scrolled through her list, frowned slightly, then smiled. "Oh, here you are. You're listed as a guest." She handed me a badge. Not co-founder, not operations lead, not even team member. Just guest. The plastic felt heavy in my hand as I clipped it to my blazer. People streamed past me, most wearing exhibitor or speaker badges. I felt suddenly, acutely visible and invisible at the same time. My chest tightened, but I pinned the badge on carefully and walked into the main hall. Because sometimes you stay long enough to watch the lie collapse under its own weight. And I had a feeling that collapse was coming soon. The presentation started at 10:30. I found a seat in the second row, close enough to see everything but far enough back not to be noticed. The room filled quickly with venture capitalists, angel investors, and tech journalists. Everyone who mattered in our industry seemed to be here. Cameron walked onto the stage looking polished and confident in a tailored suit I'd never seen before. He launched into the pitch with practiced ease, his voice carrying perfectly through the sound system. And then he began telling our story. Except it wasn't our story anymore. He described founding the company after a difficult personal setback without mentioning me once. He talked about validating the market need, conducting customer research, and developing the core technology as if he'd done it all alone. Every timeline was subtly altered. Every achievement had been reframed to center him. When he mentioned our first major client, the contract I'd spent 3 months negotiating, he said, "I secured our anchor customer through persistent relationship building." I sat perfectly still, memorizing every word, especially the parts that weren't true. Because lies have a funny way of unraveling when someone remembers what actually happened. The presentation was smooth and impressive. Cameron had always been good at public speaking, at making complex ideas sound simple and exciting. The slides were polished, the data compelling. I recognized most of it because I'd helped create it. Then came the question and answer session. A woman in the front row raised her hand. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with sharp eyes and an expensive watch. I recognized her from industry articles. Victoria Chen, a prominent angel investor known for asking difficult questions. Can you walk me through how you validated enterprise demand before building the platform? She asked. That's usually the hardest part for startups in this space. Cameron's smile didn't waver, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Just for half a second. A moment of hesitation. That validation work had been mine. All of it. The market research, the customer interviews, the demand analysis. I'd spent 6 months building relationships with potential clients, understanding their pain points, and proving that our solution addressed real needs. He cleared his throat and launched into an answer full of buzzwords and vague generalities. Process-driven approach, iterative methodology, customer-centric thinking. Nothing specific. Nothing concrete. Victoria Chen frowned slightly, her pen hovering over her notepad. She didn't look satisfied with his answer, but she didn't press further. Not yet. But I saw it. The first small crack in his perfect presentation. The tiniest suggestion that maybe he didn't know his own company as well as he claimed. The room felt different suddenly. A few other investors exchanged glances. Someone in the back row stopped typing and looked up with renewed attention. Cameron moved quickly to the next question, recovering his momentum. But that moment lingered in the air like smoke. He finished the presentation to enthusiastic applause. Investors lined up to talk with him afterward, exchanging business cards and scheduling follow-up meetings. From my seat, I watched him, network and charm, playing the role of visionary founder with practiced ease. Nobody approached me. Why would they? According to my badge, I was just a guest. I stood slowly, dropped my crumpled coffee cup in the trash, and walked toward the exit. But before I left, I pulled out my phone and found Victoria Chen's email address through LinkedIn. Then I went home and did what I'd always done best. Organized the facts and documented everything. What Cameron forgot, in his rush to claim sole credit, was that I'd always been meticulous about documentation. It wasn't paranoia or distrust, it was just how I worked. Every important conversation got summarized in writing, every decision got recorded, every contribution got tracked. Over 4 years, I'd accumulated an extensive archive. Emails with timestamps, pitch deck drafts showing version history, client correspondence with my name and signature, meeting notes that proved who did what and when. I had the original market analysis I'd written before we even had a company name. I had interview transcripts from conversations with our first 20 potential clients. I had budget spreadsheets I'd created, partnership agreements I'd negotiated, and product specifications I'd developed. I wasn't emotional about it, I was just thorough. And thorough people don't forget what they've built, even when someone else tries to take credit. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and an external hard drive containing years of backed-up files. I began organizing everything chronologically, creating a clear timeline of who contributed what and when. Not for revenge. Not even for vindication yet. Just for clarity. Just so the truth would exist somewhere, documented and undeniable. I could have sent an angry email. I could have posted on social media, calling him out publicly and demanding recognition. I could have shown up at the office with lawyers and witnesses, making a scene that would force everyone to acknowledge what had been stolen from me. I didn't do any of those things, because I understood something important. In business, emotional reactions get dismissed. Facts get investigated. Instead of confronting him, I composed a single email to Victoria Chen, the investor who'd asked the question he couldn't quite answer. I kept it brief and professional. Subject line, additional context regarding streamlined core validation process. In the body, I introduced myself as someone involved in the company's early development. I mentioned that I had documentation regarding the market validation work she'd asked about. I offered to share it if she found it relevant to her evaluation. No accusations, no drama, just information. I attached 3 files. The original market analysis with my name and date stamp, a summary of the customer interview process with documented responses, and an early pitch deck showing my role as co-founder. Then I clicked send before I could second-guess myself. The email disappeared into the digital void, I closed my laptop and waited. The response came faster than I expected. Victoria Chen replied within 90 minutes. Ms. Brooks, thank you for reaching out. Yes, I would very much like to review any documentation you can provide regarding the validation work. I'm conducting due diligence on several companies from yesterday's demo day, and thorough information is always appreciated. Would you be available for a brief phone call next week? Best regards, Victoria. I read it 3 times, my heart beating faster. This wasn't just polite acknowledgement. This was genuine interest. I spent the weekend organizing everything into a clear, chronological narrative, not emotional, not accusatory, just facts, dates, documents, evidence. By Monday morning, I had a comprehensive folder showing exactly how Streamline Core had been built, who had done what, and how the story Cameron told didn't match reality. When Victoria called on Tuesday, I was ready. We talked for 45 minutes. She asked specific questions about validation methodology, client acquisition strategy, and operational development. I answered each one with concrete details and supporting documentation. At the end of the call, she said something that made my stomach flip. Thank you, Natalie. This clarifies quite a lot. I'll be in touch. 3 days after my conversation with Victoria, I received a calendar invitation that told me everything I needed to know. Streamline Core follow-up session with Capital Ventures Partners. Date, next Thursday. Time, 2 p.m. Attendees, Cameron Walsh, 3 named investors. This time, my name wasn't on the invitation at all. Not as a guest. Not as anything. I stared at the notification on my phone, understanding exactly what it meant. They were doing deeper due diligence. They were asking harder questions. And Cameron didn't want me anywhere near those conversations. I could imagine his reasoning. Keep it clean. Keep it simple. Don't introduce complications or conflicting narratives. The less I was involved, the easier it would be to maintain his version of history. What he didn't realize was that my absence from that meeting would be more damaging than my presence. Because investigators notice what's missing. They wonder about gaps in stories. They ask uncomfortable questions about why certain people aren't available for comment. I didn't try to get myself added to the invitation. I didn't need to be in that room. The truth was already circulating without me, moving through investor networks and due diligence processes, like water finding cracks in concrete. 2 weeks passed with unusual quiet. No announcements about funding, no press releases about successful closes, no triumphant LinkedIn posts from Cameron celebrating new investments. Streamline Core's social media went eerily silent. The optimistic updates and milestone celebrations that had been posted almost daily suddenly stopped. I checked the company website occasionally. Nothing had changed. The team page still showed Cameron's face prominently, while mine had been removed months ago. The About Us section still told the sanitized version of our origin story. But something was clearly happening behind the scenes. I heard it through whispers in my professional network. A former colleague mentioned that she'd heard the funding round was pending additional information. Another contact said he'd been asked to provide references about the company's early days, which struck him as unusual timing. My phone stayed quiet. Cameron didn't reach out, which told me he probably didn't know yet how much trouble he was in. Or maybe he knew but couldn't figure out what to do about it. Either way, his silence was revealing. Because confident people don't go quiet during funding rounds. They celebrate, they announce, they build momentum. Silence meant uncertainty. And uncertainty meant the questions were getting harder to answer. On a Wednesday afternoon, I received a text from someone I hadn't heard from in months. Austin Cooper, a mutual friend who'd introduced Cameron and me years ago. He'd stayed connected to the company in an informal advisory role. Hey Nat, not sure what's happening, but some investors have been reaching out asking about early operations and who built what. Just thought you should know. I stared at the message, feeling something shift in my chest. They were asking. The board, the investors, the people whose money Cameron was trying to secure, they were investigating the gaps in his story. I typed back, "Thanks for the heads up." Austin responded immediately. For what it's worth, I told them the truth. You built the foundation of that company. Anyone who was paying attention knows that. I didn't reply to that. I didn't need to defend myself to Austin. He'd seen the work firsthand. But his message confirmed what I'd suspected. The narrative was turning. Not because I'd fought for it, not because I'd demanded recognition, but because truth has a way of surfacing when people start asking the right questions. And Victoria Chen, I was learning, was very good at asking the right questions. The second investor presentation happened without me knowing about it beforehand. I only found out because a journalist I vaguely knew posted about it on Twitter. Interesting follow-up session at Capital Ventures today. Streamline Core founder struggling to answer detailed questions about early customer development. Funding seems uncertain. I sat on my couch, reading that tweet over and over. Then I searched for more information and found a brief article on a tech news site. The reporter noted that Cameron had been asked to provide more detailed information about the company's validation process and initial client pipeline design. According to the article, he'd promised to send additional documentation, but hadn't been able to answer specific questions during the meeting. When pressed on who conducted the original customer interviews and relationship building, the reporter wrote, Walsh provided vague responses that left investors visibly concerned. I closed my laptop and leaned back, feeling exhausted and vindicated and sad all at once. This wasn't satisfying the way I thought it might be. It wasn't sweet revenge or triumphant victory. It was just inevitable. He'd built a story on a foundation of lies, and foundations like that don't hold weight. Now people were watching, paying attention, questioning the narrative they'd been sold. My LinkedIn profile suddenly exploded with activity. Connection requests from people I'd never met. Profile views from venture capital firms. Messages from recruiters and founders asking if I was open to opportunities. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. Then I realized, people were investigating me. They were researching the gaps in Cameron's story and finding my name in old articles, early pitch material, and company formation documents that still existed in various archives. The truth was circulating through professional networks like wildfire. I didn't post anything inflammatory or accusatory. I simply updated my profile to accurately reflect my role. Co-founder and operations lead, Streamline Core, 2019-2024. Led market validation, customer development, and operational infrastructure for logistics software startup. Simple, factual, undeniable. The next day I received an email that changed everything. It was from a venture capital firm I'd admired for years. Ms. Brooks, we came across your background while evaluating opportunities in the logistics space. Your experience with market validation and operational development is impressive. If you're considering new ventures or advisory roles, we'd welcome a conversation about potential collaboration. Would you be available for coffee next week? I read it 3 times before it fully registered. They weren't just acknowledging my work. They were offering support for whatever came next. The coffee meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning at a cafe downtown. I arrived 15 minutes early, ordered chamomile tea because my hands were already shaking from nerves, and sat by the window. The investor who'd emailed me was named Patricia Holbrook, a partner at Catalyst Ventures. She arrived exactly on time, dressed in sharp business casual and carrying a leather portfolio. Natalie, she said, extending her hand. Thank you for meeting with me. We talked for over an hour. She asked thoughtful questions about my experience, my approach to market validation, and my vision for the logistics industry. She never directly mentioned Cameron or the funding situation, but the subtext was clear. We've been looking for someone with deep operational expertise in this space, Patricia said toward the end of our conversation. If you were starting something new, we'd be very interested in having an early conversation. I set down my cup carefully, processing what she was really saying. Are you offering to fund a new venture? I'm saying that if you decided to build something, on your own terms, with proper structure and recognition, you wouldn't have to do it alone. I closed my notebook, smiled, and said, Then I think we should talk again soon. The news broke on a Thursday afternoon, buried in a tech industry newsletter most people don't read. Streamline Core funding round postponed indefinitely pending resolution of internal structural questions. No dramatic announcement. No press conference. Just a quiet withdrawal. The investors had walked away. Not because the product was bad or the market opportunity wasn't real, but because they couldn't trust the founder to tell them the truth about something as fundamental as who built the company. Cameron's carefully constructed narrative had collapsed under the weight of basic due diligence. I found out from 3 different sources within an hour. Former colleagues reached out expressing shock and concern. Industry contacts sent sympathetic messages. Austin texted, "Guess the truth caught up. You doing okay?" I was more than okay. I felt lighter than I had in months. This wasn't revenge. This was consequences. Natural, inevitable consequences of lying about something that could be easily verified. That evening, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a post-mortem or an exposé. Just notes about what I'd learned, what I'd do differently next time, and what kind of company I actually wanted to build. One with clear equity agreements, proper documentation, honest partnerships, and most importantly, one where I'd never have to beg for credit that was already mine. Streamline Core didn't disappear overnight. Companies rarely do, but it started to shrink. The team got smaller, the office got quieter, the ambitious expansion plans got quietly shelved. I heard through my network that 2 senior engineers had left, then the head of client services, then the marketing manager who'd been hired just 6 months earlier. Cameron was still technically running the company, but it was running on fumes. The momentum was gone. The funding was gone. The story he'd sold to everyone was gone. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't send a message saying "I told you so" or asking for acknowledgement. I didn't need closure from him. The industry had already provided it. What happened to Streamline Core wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'd mourned what we'd built together and what had been stolen from me. Now, I was focused on what came next. Patricia and her firm had introduced me to 2 other founders in the logistics space. We'd been having exploratory conversations about collaboration, shared resources, and potential partnerships. No romantic entanglements this time. No blurred lines between personal and professional, just clear agreements, documented contributions, and mutual respect. It felt completely different from how Streamline Core had started. And that difference felt like freedom. 6 months later, I stood in my own small office downtown, looking out at the city skyline. The space was modest, but mine. Real mine, with my name on the lease and my vision driving every decision. I'd started a consulting business, helping early-stage logistics startups avoid the mistakes I'd made, teaching founders about market validation, operational infrastructure, and protecting their contributions legally. The work was fulfilling in ways that surprised me. I wasn't just building something. I was helping others build things properly, with integrity and clear ownership. My client list grew quickly through word of mouth. Founders appreciated someone who understood both the technical challenges and the human complications of startup life. Several venture capital firms had me on retainer as an advisor, and Patricia's firm had invested in 3 companies I'd helped develop. I was making less money than I would have if Streamline Core had succeeded with proper recognition. But I was sleeping better. I owned my work completely. My name was on everything I created. Nobody could erase me from my own story anymore. And when people asked about my background, I told them the truth. I'd co-founded a company that taught me valuable lessons about trust, documentation, and knowing your worth. The invitation arrived via email on a random Tuesday morning. You're invited to serve as a panelist at the Capital Ventures Demo Day, evaluating early-stage operations and market validation. I stared at it for a long moment, then started laughing. 6 months ago, I'd sat in that same venue wearing a guest badge, watching my contributions get erased. Now they wanted me on the panel, the stage, evaluating other founders' pitches. The irony was so perfect, it almost hurt. I accepted immediately. Demo Day arrived with beautiful weather. I walked into the same conference center, but this time I was wearing a speaker badge. My name was printed in the program. My bio listed my consulting firm and advisory roles. When I stepped onto the panel table beside 3 other investors and industry experts, I looked out at the audience and felt something settle in my chest. Not revenge, not vindication, just peace. The presentations began. I listened carefully to each founder, asked thoughtful questions about their validation processes and operational strategies, and offered genuine feedback. When one young woman struggled to answer a question about her market research, I saw her co-founder lean forward to help explain. Partners. real partners, supporting each other publicly. That's what it should have looked like, and nobody questioned my role or my right to be there. Not once. Cameron never reached out to apologize or explain or ask for forgiveness. I never contacted him either. We existed in completely separate orbits now, occasionally crossing paths in the same professional circles but never acknowledging each other directly. I heard through mutual contacts that he'd taken a job at a consulting firm. Solid work, decent pay, but not the visionary founder story he'd been trying to sell. Streamline Core still technically existed, though it had been sold to a larger company for significantly less than what those early investors would have put in. The team had been absorbed. The brand had been retired. The story had ended quietly. I didn't feel triumphant about his struggles. I didn't feel vindictive or satisfied by his reduced circumstances. Mostly, I just felt tired when I thought about it at all. The whole situation had taken something from both of us. He'd lost his company and his credibility. I'd lost years of work and a relationship I'd valued. There were no real winners in that story. Just different kinds of losses. But I'd learned something he apparently hadn't. That closure doesn't always come with an apology. Sometimes it comes from building something new, something better. Something that doesn't require anyone else's permission or recognition to be valuable. Now, when people ask me how I handled being erased from my own company, I tell them what I learned through that whole painful experience. I didn't fight the lie directly, I say. I just let the truth outlive it. Because that's what truth does if you give it time and documentation and space to breathe. It surfaces, it circulates, it answers questions that lies can't handle. You don't have to scream about injustice if you've documented reality. You don't have to demand recognition if your work speaks for itself. You just have to be patient enough to let other people start asking the questions that liars can't answer. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was trusting that truth would matter more than charisma, that facts would outlast fiction, that competence would eventually be recognized even when someone tried to claim it. But it did, slowly, quietly, without dramatic confrontations or public battles. The truth just kept existing until enough people noticed the gaps in the story they'd been sold. That's what I tell young founders now. Document everything. Protect your contributions legally. Trust your competence. And remember that knowing your worth means never begging to be seen by people who benefited from keeping you invisible. Because the right people will see you, eventually. And when they do, you'll be ready.